All right, good. So the knowledge that we get here in our class, if it stays in the class, we have not learned. It has to spill into our daily lives, and it has to infiltrate into our actions, thoughts, speech, ideas, beliefs. Then only it has served its purpose. Life is nothing but events, and this knowledge that we receive over here and we find it within ourselves, if it's applied to all these events, then all of a sudden the meaning of the life changes. But that's the practice that we have to develop, because everybody lives their life and everybody's life is full of events. Without events, there is no life. The day the events stop, life stops. So life is something that creates the events for you. And who creates the events for you? Consciousness. Things just happen. Even if you sit in a corner in the Himalayan mountains, events are happening. There is no stoppage of events. But the events are like flowers. You just collect the flowers. At the end of the day, they wilt out and you throw them away. And that's what we do. We let each event slide by and not do anything with it. We don't really do anything, so they become wilted flowers in our life, and we keep on collecting. And then we stick to those events that become past for us, and we carry on the burden of this past, which are nothing but wilted flowers. We never learned from each and every single event. So it really fails to really change our life, and our life becomes nothing but series of events. And that anyone can do. It's like you take the pictures and you really keep on collecting, and hard drives keep on getting bigger and bigger, and we really don't do anything. When at the time we were just busy taking pictures and never really enjoyed the place. You take the pictures of Taj Mahal and come home and say, okay, when I go home, I'll enjoy the Taj Mahal. But you failed to enjoy when you were there. And that's the bottom line. So each event has to be enjoyed in its totality. And for that, you need a keen observation, a keen application of our spiritual knowledge that we have. So we were in Galapagos. We wanted to talk about that. It was a fascinating place, and it's very unique in the sense that, as we all know, that Charles Darwin, the biologist, in the mid 1800s, declared his theory of the origin of the species. And it was such a fascinating place that it really taught me a lot. And there was a lot of spiritual awakening that could take place because of the pristine nature that they have preserved. Because these islands, they are like 600 miles west of the Ecuador mainland, and the humans really have not been there for a long time. There is not that much human presence. So the animals have evolved on their own without human intervention. So they are not afraid of humans. There is no hunting, there is no killing, at least at this point. There was a time the turtles were killed by the sailors, but that was way back, and since then nothing, no human interference. Nobody has lived there. No settlements have taken place. So you walk out and all of a sudden you see the sea lions right next to you. The iguanas are crossing the path and they don't even care about the cars passing by. It was such a genuine innocence in the face of these animals that they considered that this is the way it's supposed to be. And the World Heritage people are really trying their hard to maintain the pristineness of this environment. But there are so many islands, and then each island they have set aside like 97% has to be left in its pristine way. So all these animals are evolving even right now. But when Charles Darwin came, something happened in his mind, and sometimes it takes only one thought to change the world. And that's exactly what happened with him. Before that, a lot of people have a series of events happening in their lives and nobody paid attention to it. Before Charles Darwin and after Charles Darwin are two different chapters of the science written up. because he proposed the theory of evolution, and he proposed how the world has been created and is still being created. Before Charles Darwin, the only knowledge that we had, the source of knowledge, was the religion. The Christianity says that God created the world in 6 days and then it rested on the seventh day. That's why we all take off on Sundays. Thank God for Christians, So otherwise we will be working all throughout the 7 days. So, but that was such a silly theory, and but everybody believed it for 1800 years since before Christ, and we all believed that this is the way it is, and there was no other explanation. All of a sudden, a single thought came into Charles Darwin's head as he was walking around on these islands. He saw the mockingbirds and finches. Finches are small sparrow-like birds, and he noticed, and he went from islands to islands, and that on each island the same species of birds would have a different beaks. He took the specimens with him, and then he studied and he really pondered over it hard. He says, how come the beak of the finch on this island is short and thick, and the same finch growing up on another island has a long and thin beak? And he thought and thought. The species was the same, but all of a sudden these finches were looking different. So he proposed the theory. He observed that it depended upon the source of food supply that was being available to the finches. If the food supply included the hard, thick grains, you need a short and thick beak to break it. Then only you can eat. And if the flowers and the twigs and small delicate food source is there on another island, you don't need a short and thick beak, so a long thin beak is fine. Certain flowers have a deep funnel, so you need a longer beak to reach to the nectar. So he realized that it's the outside environment that brings the changes in the animals, and that's how we ourselves have come up to this level, even going through the monkeys and the humans, and all those things came up. So he proposed the theory of evolution, and it really caught the whole world by surprise, and they were not even ready to accept, but little by little they had no choice because the evidences were everywhere. So that's what I said, evidences are everywhere. Every single event brings us the message of God, and we don't really pay attention to it. So even a single atom holds on to the infinity. If you say that, okay, I'm gonna disregard these droplets, but I want the whole ocean. So if you really shoot to practice, do the sadhana, and you want the whole God within you, but these are the small things which are happening. He's manifesting everywhere, and his signatures are everywhere. Even a single leaf, a single flower can open up something within you and can give you the realization of the whole almighty consciousness. So don't shoot for bigs, shoot for small things. Pay attention to small things. Small events can open up. So he did, and that's how the theory of evolution started. The question is, once he proposed that how the animals are changing, there was a lot of controversy about it. And then one of the theory that came about said, why? How do you explain all these things? So one of the theory that was put forward was the survival of the fittest. Say that whoever is the strong can survive this, withstand these outside forces, so they survive, and whoever becomes weak. And the problem was, this theory was proposed by the Western society, because the whole Western thinking is limited to your physical structure. They have no spiritual background. So ego is the only thing they know. If they see a bird, they see a bird with physical structure and what the bird can do to survive. And if it cannot, then that means it's a weak bird. And the big bird will basically disappear from the race of evolution, and a strong bird will survive. Even right now, we see this philosophy and the way of life filtering into our day-to-day life. Whoever is the stronger wins. And the survival of the fittest is still existing on every sector of the life. And whoever is, which is the strongest team, and try to work harder, and it's a competition, fierce competition. And all this has infiltrated into the society. And that's why the society is filled with nothing but competition, anger, frustrations, and superiority complex and inferiority complex. The corporate world is all filled with all these things. So if that's all there is, then we are doomed, pretty much. Then the life is nothing but suffering. That's where the spirituality comes into the action. So I happened to watch a show way before this thing on PBS, and it says what Charles Darwin could not know. It was a very fascinating show. In that, they studied the genetic structure of different animals. Now, at the time of Darwin, geneticism was not developed. Genetic structure, genetic genomes were not created. Nobody knew about the genes either. Only the physical appearances, that's just all of that. Science was not advanced. But later on, now we have genetics is developed so well, so we can study the genes. So they gave the behind the door look of how the evolution is going on. And that's why the name of the program was What Charles Darwin Could Not Know, because he did not have access to this knowledge. But it's very interesting because how the Charles Darwin was looking at the physical structure of the animals, but now with our technology, scientists are looking at the genetic structures themselves. And on the genes, they found out that there are on-off switches. And that's what determines what ultimately gets expressed. In the show, they show the tiny embryos, believe it or not, of a human, fish, a frog, or a roundworm or earthworm. They all look the same. All embryos look the same. But each embryo, through the development, turns out to be something else. The question was why? Monkeys and us, our genetic structure is probably 99.99% same. But monkeys are monkeys and we are humans. Huge difference though. So what happened? So they found out that there are on-off switches on each genes. And these on-off switches allows them to be expressed or not expressed. So they found out one particular gene about the jaw muscles remains on in the monkeys for a longer time. So their jaw muscles develop, jaw becomes longer, but at the cost of the brain, because this gene happens to be geographically located in the same area, so the brain development remains low. In humans, this switch turns off. So when the jaw muscles gene turns off, the next genetic location for the brain expanded. So in the evolutionary chain, our intelligence is only a product of a genetic switches being on and off. The show leaves us at this point. It doesn't take us any further. Same thing actually they studied on a fish that was living near a shoreline, and they were being chased by the sharks. And then, so they figured that if anything happens in the evolution, there has to be a genetic explanation for it. So they figured out that this fish must be trying to escape from the attack of the sharks and being dragged into the shallow river and ultimately be too shallow that it has to have legs to walk, because the bottom one is becoming too narrow and there is not enough water to hold your body. So they said there must be, and they really looked for it in Pacific Ocean. They found a fish in its fins. It had exactly rudimentary leg. Our feet structure was located in that, including the ankle and the fingers, the toes and everything else. So they said that was a link between the marine life and the life on the, tiny things wrote the whole history, a tiny genetic structure. But still science is falling behind because it can look at things, right? So if a scientist is studying the genetic structure, the genes become the objects and the scientists are the subjects. They're applying their own awareness, intelligence, and studying the genetic structure. So the genes become the objects. But what is happening behind these genes, nobody knows. And the only way to know is meditation. Because in meditation, you become the subject. the consciousness, the awareness, because you study the thoughts. Thoughts are coming and thoughts are going. Thoughts are the objects, and your live consciousness, the awareness, becomes the subject. So we are on the other side of the equation, behind the objects. And the science will never reach to that level, no matter how micro level they go, quantum level they go, but they will be studying everything as an object. But the subjectivity is what we're really talking about. So subjectivity is the where the ultimate game is happening. So now, if we have to create another show, that what Charles Darwin could not know, part 2 will have to be written by our rishis, our spiritual leaders who are leading the way. Buddha and Krishna can write all these things. There is no way Charles Darwin or any scientist can ever know what is happening. So what happens? Why the genes become, the switches become on or off? Is our internal desires. So so I looked at the whole thing from the Galapagos Islands. The animals were faced with very tough situations. For example, there are iguanas there. So there are marine iguanas which go into the ocean. Iguanas are not supposed to be going to the ocean. Only the iguanas in Galapagos go into the ocean to feed, because there is not enough food on the land, because the land is created by volcanoes. These are all series of volcanoes, and there is not enough food supply. So they go into the ocean. There is algae that grows. So they have learned the technique how to dive into the ocean. They can hold their breath for almost 30 minutes, and they eat that algae and come up, right? So it's an adaptation. So the game of the evolution is played not by the survival of the fittest, by the adaptability. Whoever can adapt will survive. Now, adaptability is all built in. How the adaptability happens, we don't know. So iguanas create this at the end of the day, or frequently, because they are in the salt water. What they do is they have too much salt accumulated in their body. So they have a special gland that is being developed that they can throw the salt out. Because originally they are freshwater animals and they're land animals. So we saw them spitting but not from the mouth, but there is a special gland. So these are all adaptations, and these adaptations make them survive. So life is all about, it's a continuous struggle between the outside environment and the internal way of changing somehow to adapt to the environment. At the same time, the land iguanas are different. Now, land iguanas, they lay their eggs up in the volcanoes towards the peak, because they need a warm sand to lay their eggs so that the babies can come out, right? But they keep on climbing. The climbing is very steep, and it's really a struggle. They struggle so hard to reach to the top, and when they reach to the top, they find out that there are 10,000 iguanas already there trying to lay their eggs. There is no room. So what do? So they go over the volcanic rim and go down. And going down the volcano is tough, because volcanoes frequently are active, and once you go into the cone, you're dead. And in fact, I saw the show of Galapagos on the Netflix. The same thing. They say that a lot of dead iguanas sitting there. So they risk their lives to go down. Ultimately, they find a spot, lay their eggs. All that so that the genetic material they have can progress and the continuity of life can happen. So if you really think about it, we have ego, we have our intelligence, we have our intellect, we have ways of thinking and all that. They don't. So they don't really have ego, say, okay, now let me try to figure out what do I need now. Do I need a special gland so that I can throw the salt? Nothing like that. Their minds are very tiny. They don't have egos. They basically, their minds and the sense organs, what they do is they carry the sensations from outside world into their tiny mind, which is very primitive, very small mind. But ultimately, where does this information go? To the consciousness. the consciousness, the awareness is continuously watching all these things which are happening. As I talk, consciousness is watching. As you listen, consciousness is watching that you are listening to the talk. Everything is in the center, and the consciousness is the ultimate game changer. So because you cannot even say that iguanas or finches had their mind of their own to change themselves. No. But the West always thought that way, that it was the strongest, we had a will to survive. Nothing like that. The minds were very primitive. So ultimately it was the consciousness. Now consciousness, as we know in the meditation, if we go deep, is formless. There is no shape, there is no size, there is no color, but it's pure awareness. And it is infinite. Infinity is holding on to infinite possibilities. So, okay, so if you really look at, say, a courtyard, a court is being held. For example, iguana is coming and it says presenting the problem to this infinite consciousness, and the infinite consciousness figures it out that for the life to express through this animal needs this to survive. Now, the consciousness does not have eyes, does not have ears, does not have nose, does not have smell. You are his eyes and ears. And so in a very primitive way, these animals were doing the job of bringing the information from the outside world through their tiny minds in front of the consciousness. And the consciousness says, okay, he needs a salt throwing gland, otherwise too much salt will accumulate. And say, okay, you get it. Somebody needs a shorter beak, he gets it. Somebody needs a longer and smaller slender beak, he gets it. It's almost like a magician ready to offer all these things, infinite potentials. So this is where the holy grail of the whole thing is. So the evolution is happening because of the infinite capacity of the consciousness to allow the animals to function in all different, the examples I give are very few and far in between. There were turtles, huge turtles. How did they get so big? They lay their eggs on the sand, on the beach, but they spend their life up there. It takes 25 years for them to become mature. So they can, how do they know? 25 years. We don't even remember 2 days. What did we eat yesterday? Some instinct tells them at the age of 25 to go up to the highlands, they call, and mate over there. And the pregnant female goes down and then lays the eggs. All this has been going on without human intervention. We think that we are something. This cosmic intelligence has created everything around us, including us, and we never pay attention to this. Nowadays, I have become very important. My sphere has become more important. Ego has become more important. But these animals had no ego. How could they? They were not intellectually developed enough to even know. See, there is a big difference between animals and us. Animals exist, but they don't know that they exist. Humans exist, but we know that we exist. There is a huge jump of consciousness. And once we know that we exist, we try to preserve it because we don't want to die. Animals don't care because they don't even know that they survive. They just survive. They act through natural instincts. The consciousness was everything before the humans came into the picture. Now humans have come, the ego has come and has destroyed the world, the frictions and sufferings and all these things. But before that, the life and death had no value because life and death is srushti, sthiti, lay. It's all part of it. Generation, operation, destruction. These are the tools the consciousness uses ultimately to get higher in the life forms, to create something like us. So we should be proud that consciousness has created us, but we never pay attention to the consciousness. And that's what the spirituality is about. To realize that ego has no value for further evolution. So right now, we are in conflict with the nature. We want to change ourselves, but we are not patient enough for the consciousness to change us. So what we do is, since we cannot change we change the nature. We destroy the forest. We do this, we do this. Whatever we want, we do it without even thinking of the large life forms which exist and created by consciousness over millions of years of evolution. We have disregard. We have become very important. So if you look at the animals, what kind of life they live, if you look at it, every animal is peaceful. There is no struggle there. There is no friction there, because they are not afraid of death. If something happens, they will struggle for as a natural instinct, but they die, succumb, no problem. And every single animal you see is very peaceful. There is no fight, no interactions, nothing. So what a life can be without ego is what the Galapagos showed me. A peaceful life where there is no friction, there is no me and mine, there is no suffering, there is no superiority complex, there is no inferiority complex. You see the pristine glory of the nature in its best shape. And there are no older animals because they just don't survive. The life forces make sure that whichever is getting older and weaker and all that, it destroys. So what is evolution? The Western society calls the physical forms changing is the evolution. But if you really think about it, what is evolving? The evolution is happening in the consciousness itself. In a very primitive form, it has a very primitive way of expressing itself. But it makes sure it goes to the next level, and to the next level, and to the next level. It has come to us now. So consciousness is expressing. If we interfere with the consciousness cycle, we will perish, just like iguanas perished or finches perished. And so life and death has no value. We give importance to life and death, but in reality, in a very big context of things, is what survives ultimately is the consciousness. The consciousness and its ability to express itself, the life, that is a life-giving life. That's the life that we call life is not life at all. What we call life is death. The moment you are born, it's certain you're gonna die. Whether you live 70 years or 100 years, doesn't matter. You're gonna die regardless. So death is certain to your physical form. But your spiritual form, there is no death. The continuous cycle goes on. Krishna says, Matta paratapam. Matta paratapam na anyat. Matta paratapam, come to me. I am the best of all. Na anyat kinchit asti dhananjay. Krishna uses the words because he has given different names to Arjuna. And each word, each name he gives has a very meaning. Dhananjay, accumulator of wealth. You have attained so much wealth. He was the prince. He was everything. He had all the money. And that's why he tells Dhananjay, there is nothing superior to me to achieve. Achieve me and you have achieved everything. So matta paratapam na anyat, nothing else, kinchit asti Dhananjay. Why? Because Krishna is the center. Krishna is the center of everything. The consciousness is the center of everything. Evolution happens around the axis of consciousness. So in the next line he says, Mai sarvam idam, everything is connected to me, protam. Mai sarvam idam protam, everything is connected to me. How? Sutra manigala eva. The way beads are going through the center thread, I am that thread. Krishna says, I am the owner of crores of universes. You go into the bottom of any single universe, you'll find me. Forget about universe. Tiny flower, iguana, salt, finches, you will find me. So inside is the consciousness that is ultimately evolving. Through us, we should become a vehicle and allow the consciousness to work through us. But we are not allowing is our ego. We come in the way and we think we know more than Krishna. And that's where the problem comes in. Until you hold on to the ego and try to find consciousness, it's not going to happen. The ego has to go down. You have to understand the futility of the ego. Then only consciousness can sink through you, ultimately to reach to the consciousness. So what is all this about? Karma theory, right? You look at the Galapagos animals. What are they doing? They have no ego. They are allowing the consciousness to filter through them. They become the victim. They are being born, they do their job, and they die. No problem. Krishna says, I will play the flute. You become my flute. Because I cannot do it without you. There is a great partnership going on between us and the Krishna. But only if we let it happen. But we don't. And that's why we're suffering. All our life, the life of ego cannot win because ego is fake. There is nothing like ego. There is nothing like you. How many iguanas died on that slopes of volcanoes? How many did they have names? Not one. Everybody died nameless. And here, forget it. Even after I die, I need a big mausoleum with my name written on it. My name should be forever. And the name, where did it come from? The human society. Whatever is given to you by the human society will be gone.
There is insurance for cemetery also.
So,
insurance for cemetery.
So we are living life and giving wrong importance to the wrong things. We give importance to the fame. We give importance to our objects of pleasure. We need recognition. We need to be appreciated. We need to be called beautiful. We need to be called handsome. All these are on our head. And that's part of our ego. And that's why we're suffering. So go down as much as you can. Find this consciousness within you, because that's the ultimate axis around which you're going to be rotating. With ego or without ego, you're going to perish. And when you perish, your ego will perish, except you'll be born again with an unsatisfied ego. Ego can never satisfy you. Casino always wins. You walk into the casino thinking that you're going to win. Casino always wins. Ultimately, you're going to be dying with all your unfulfilled desires created by the ego. The earlier you realize, the better you are. So Darwin versus Krishna. All right? So much for it.